Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction and for inviting me today. It's my pleasure to be here, and my topic is China's rise as a global science and technology power, implications for Germany. And my agenda today starts with a little cartoon. You might have read The Economist from last week. And the title was Red Moon Rising, How China Could Dominate Science Should the World Worry. And this is exactly the topic I'm talking about. We could replace the world by Germany, because some people in Germany are quite worried about China. So my agenda is, I start with the question what innovation performance is like in China. So we compared with international situations, and the second topic is China's science and technology innovation governance, so STI, we use this word, it's the abbreviation of STI. Innovation strategy and policy is the next part, and finally I talk a bit about China and Germany, bilateral science and innovation cooperation. So let's start by looking at the statistics. China's ambitions are very strong, very high, and they want to become, by 2050, the global leader in science and technology. So this is really something, and some of the countries who are actually the leaders today, like the US and some European countries such as Germany, they're quite worried about that they will lose their position. So we have to look at the statistics, indicators showing what the innovation is like in China, and we have a number of so-called input and output indicators showing how innovative China is. Let's start with the indicator R&D, or research and development. We have, first of all, the gross expenditure on R&D, business expenditure on R&D, higher education expenditure on R&D, higher education R&D spending funded by business sectors. These are the basic indicators showing how much China invests in research and development. Another very important indicator people often look at is human capital. So how many people have a tertiary degree or have a PhD degree, and also vocational training is something we look at if we want to know if a country is innovative. And there's another, it's an output indicator, is publication in international journals. This refers to those articles which have undergone a refereed process and have a good quality. The second is patents, and here we have national patents and so-called PCT patents. This means patents which are designed for the international market, because the procedure to apply for these patents is quite costly. And then we have high-tech exports and the technology trade balance. So all of these are indicators showing how innovative a country is. Now let's look at the first indicator, R&D. A few years ago, the OECD, this is on top of this, the first graph, showing that China has made quite progress in the volume of R&D spend, and that within the next few years, China will overtake even the US in terms of volume of R&D spending. This is something which was quite shocking for most of the countries, when the OECD was thinking that over time now China is leading then in terms of spending. Another very important figure is R&D in percentage of GDP, so how much percent of GDP is spent on research and development. And you see here the graph that since 2008, this percentage has changed quite dramatically from 1.4 to more than 2.2, about 2.2%. And China's goal by 2020 is to achieve a percentage of 2.5. So 2.5 is the average of the OECD countries. So China has already achieved quite a strong progress in this regard. Let's look at another graph showing the number and global share of academic articles. So here you see also China, the different graphs refer to different countries like China, GP is Japan, KR is South Korea, then Germany and US. And you see the green graph, very impressive growth of articles published in China. And you see on the right side then the share, the percentage of all articles China has published. So the share has increased from 10% to more than 20%. So again, here China has made quite a lot of progress. Yeah, here is, yeah, and you see Germany as well. Maybe you have a look at it. Germany, it's on the bottom line, and not much has changed in this term. Okay. Now there is the output indicator of patents. And here I compare different countries in terms of registered PCT patents. And China, you see, is already second in this comparison, just right after the United States and followed by Japan and Germany on the fourth place. Here is quite an interesting, I find, quite an interesting figure. It shows that some of the Chinese companies, especially in the IT industry, are already quite strong in terms of registering PCT patents, especially, for example, the Huawei company you might know, and ZTE is another telecommunication company, and BOE is a technology company focusing on semiconductor. Now, these are very small ideas about the indicators showing how innovative a country is. Now I will give you an example. It's a publication called Innovation Indicator. It's in German, Innovationsindikator, and it's published by the German Industrial Association, by the EASY, it's Fraunhofer Institute of Innovation, and ZEW is the Center for European Economy. So these three organizations, they publish a report every year, and this report includes a sort of composite indicator of 38 sub-indicators. So it's not only the indicators I just showed you, but also something related to economy in general, to the state and society. And here, for example, you see you have something like the percentage of employees with tertiary education in total employment, or the percentage of PhD holders with a technical focus, or you also have the PISA index. So the PISA index is an indicator which is both responsible, the state is responsible for that because the state has to provide education, and also in education in general it's an indicator. For science, these are the number of researchers per 1,000 employees, or scientific papers in total population. In the economy, for example, venture capital plays a role, how the venture capital market is providing money for startup companies. This also contributes to innovation. And for example, state society, here are indicators relating, for example, to participation of women in the economy, in the employment, or for example, percentage of R&D expenditure of public research institutes and universities in GDP. So this is a composite indicator, and it's quite interesting. 35 countries are compared, and China here, you see, has the ranking of 25. So 1 means it's what is it? Here on this side you see 1 is leading position, 35 is last position. So the leading countries here are US in 2017, the US was ranking on place number 6, and then there is Germany on place number 4, which is quite good as an average indicator for being innovative. And you see that not much has changed in terms of ranking with regard to China, although you have a lot of improvement in every kind of scientific indicators, but it is not showing here. So we have, of course, to ask why the ranking is quite low. And here are some explanations. That is that Chinese companies have become very competitive, but mostly in their own country, also in foreign countries, but mostly at home. And that economic growth still is based on price leadership, so price competitiveness, and on infrastructure investment, and not yet completely on innovation. This is the overall goal of the Chinese government, but not yet. Then China's international competitiveness of innovative products and services is restricted to some industry, and I will come to that issue, and to some fields of technology, though it's not in general very innovative. And now there is a transitionary period. China is going from a imitation model to an innovation model, and a transition from a low-cost producer to high-tech producer, and this transition period involves a lot of transaction costs. So this is also something which is reflected then in the innovation indicators. Last point, China's output efficiency is still much lower than those of the leading countries in innovation. That means input, a lot of input, but what is the output? So this is innovation efficiency. Now let's turn to the second part, China's science and technology innovation governance. And I think I should start with some general ideas about governance. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, I think this is now a really important driving force for innovation, especially since Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang came into power. So the leadership change in 2012-13 has provided much incentive for innovation, and the role of the party has become very strong. So the party is influencing this development by designing or proposing long-term goals, and also by the nomenclature. It's the party exercise authority over senior personal appointments. So if one of the leading cadres doesn't have a good record, that can be replaced, or if they are not working according to the party line, then they can replace as well. So there's a strong influence on that, and of course on the state-owned enterprises. Second part, which is also different from Western innovation systems, that the state, the government, plays a very active role in the catching up, because we already have quite a high level of innovation. We don't have to catch up, but China, when China opened its system, they had to catch up with other countries, and this process has been speeded up by the government, supplying, for example, lots of incentives for companies, supporting companies, support of technology transfer, for example, for those companies investing in China. They ask them to transfer their technology, and support of companies going global. I think this is a topic Cora will take up in the next presentation. What is also an important characteristic is the flexibility and learning aptitude, which makes the China system so, I would say, so successful. It has integrated a lot of concepts, like on the one hand you have the marketing economy, the market economy, and then you also have the Chinese characteristics of designing policy by the state and implementing it. So it's a concept introduced from foreign countries and then adapted to local conditions by the Chinese government. And I think an important characteristic is that although it's a centralized system on paper, de facto it's a decentralized decision-making situation. And so there's also always sort of a competition between the central government deciding some new policies and the local government thinking, no, we don't have to adapt it. So there's this diverging interest between local government and the central government. Now, when Xi Jinping came into power, his motto was "Make China Great Again." And then maybe later on, Trump has adopted this as well, but he said it before. So, make China great again. The idea was the renaissance of the Chinese nation. And here there's a reference to the so-called unequal treaties in 1842, when China had to open its port to other countries, and this feeling of being colonized, being forced by foreign countries is still preserved in this idea of renaissance of the Chinese nation. And the idea behind is that Dagor, a strong China, and a strong China is strong in economy, in politics, in diplomacy, in science, and this is the topic I will present in a few minutes, and armed forces. But also there are other characteristics of this great Chinese nation in the future: civilized China, equality and fairness, rich culture, high moral values, and of course a harmonious China, where you have equality and not so much income inequality and harmony between social classes. So it's more a vision, I would say. And of course a beautiful China, healthy environment, low pollution. So all this is the idea of China becoming a great nation and having all these goals achieved by 2049. And you know, for 2049 is a very important date, 100 years of the Chinese Communist Party, or the Chinese China as a nation. And of course, the Chinese Communist Party plays a crucial role in this story. In 2016, there's a very important step, the adoption of the 5-year plan. And again, here we see the innovation-driven growth as a most important guideline for the development within the next 5 years, but also goals like higher living standards, higher educational level, environmental improvement. And some of the concrete goals here are the doubling of the economy, GDP, but also per capita income, and again, the new growth model, innovation-driven. So this is something we really have to remember when we think of today's China's model. It should be a model according to the Chinese idea of innovation-driven. Now, let's look at the instruments China uses to implement, to realize this vision. So the new instruments introduced over the last few years are the so-called top-level design and small leading groups. This is outside the normal system because we have a very clear structure, but these approaches are new. And the context is that the political leadership, when it started in 2012 and 13, they were just realizing that the progress made in innovation and in becoming independent from foreign technology has been rather small. And at that time, they should speed it up. So the CPC's, Chinese Communist Party Central Committee, initiated then the so-called small leading groups. And in the science and technology system, these groups were also introduced. And what is interesting about it, that at that moment, another leading group already existed. But the one initiated by the Chinese Communist Party has been a more powerful one. So it was headed in 2012 by Liu Yandong, member of the Politburo. You see that it has been a very high ranking of this position, and vice prime minister. And this leading group then started to look at the situation of science and technology in very detail, and a very important document published then by the Communist Party was Deepening Reform of the Science and Technology System, providing guidelines for the next year's reforms. And here at the bottom I see that this institution initiated by the Chinese Communist Party then was complemented the existing one under the State Council. And this other one has it is just to say it's a more day-to-day work, and it develops strategies, policy and coordination among ministries and between the central government. But overall, the most important driving force is now the small leading group, which gives the long-term guidelines. Now, let's look what top-level design means. It's generally, you could say, it's a sort of centralization of decision-making power. And why do we need that? In China, we know that we had a lot of models and experiments and all sort of competition between provinces which contributed to growth. But for the central government, this decentralization of decision-making power went far too far, and so they decided we have to centralize some of the power again to better implement our goals. So the goal was overcoming institutional and structural barriers within the government and administration in order to achieve more efficiency. I think efficiency is the most important word when you talk about the reform of the innovation system. And now I give you one example. It is the setting up of the so-called interministerial conference, one of the most important coordination and decision-making institutions within the public funding system. So the public funding system was one of the areas when Liu Yandong decided to reform the whole S&T system, which was started reform. And here, 2015 till 2017, and the challenge was that the funding in the public research sector was not transparent, rules were just not transparent, and the practices also overlapping of competencies between different ministries, fragmentation of funding, and overlapping, of course, of programs. And the main challenge was here that there was about 100 science and technology programs and coordinating by 40 government agencies. You see that it was quite a chaos, you could say. So what they did was top-level design. They put a new structure in. It's called the New Governance Structure for Public Funding, Interministerial Conference. What they did was making a division between those managing research projects, a commission consulting it and assessing it, and another one, evaluation of projects. And underneath there is the so-called S&T Administration and Information Platform, where you, for example, can now go into internet and see what kind of research project exists. Often there are reports about the project. So this contributes to the transparency in the research funding system. Now let's come to the next topic, innovation strategy and policy. One of the main plan for S&T reform and improvement was the so-called medium and long-term plan for science and technology development, MLP, and here I present some of the goals. China, in 2006, when it started, China wants to become a leading country for technology standard for industrial equipment and innovation industry, IT, breakthrough in innovation in energy saving and environmental technologies. Another goal was international competitive research team in ICT. So IC is communication technology, biotechnology, new material, and cosmonautics. And this Red Moon Rising article was just referring to the improvement of landing on the other side of the moon. So very interesting. So internationally competitive research institute, universities, R&D intensive companies. So this were the main goals, and this also had a lot of information in which industry and which scientific sector improvement had to be made. And what were the instruments, policies? First of all, companies had to become the real driver for innovation. Because in the old system, not the companies were innovative because they were just imitating. This was the modus when China started its reform model. And the idea was giving companies incentive to make them more innovative, for them to better to get a better competitiveness in the international market. They had to achieve more improvements in R&D investment. So technology leader, to become that, you have to invest in R&D. So what did they do? They supplied tax reduction for companies or venture capital and subsidized loans, for example, for companies going abroad to buy R&D intensive countries in Germany. So the second one is research infrastructure. Lots of new research centers were set up and so-called mega projects, large projects for national cooperation on specific topics, or even inviting international cooperation in some fields. And then the third instrument was strengthening re-innovation of imported technology, government procurement, which was very important, for example, in the field of IT, and then IPR protection. So designing a better environment for companies to become innovative. You have to protect their IPRs, their intellectual property rights, so they can have the impression that they really become innovative and become a leader. Now, this was in 2006, and the idea about that was also indigenous innovation. The idea of China becoming independent from foreign countries' technology. But it didn't work out that way so well. So what they did, there was a refocusing on innovation when the new leadership, you see here Xi Jinping, came into power, refocusing on innovation, and the Central Party Committee and the State Council had a joint conference at the end of 2012 and discussed how to implement the MLP until the year 2020. And what they did was clear goals for R&D programs were stated in this conference outcome then, and I already said that research of the reform of the research funding system was another very important policy. And the setting up of the new leading group for science and technology reforms. And it was interesting that then they invited also some foreign experts to evaluate the medium and long-term plan and ask them for advice. So the system opened more, became not transparent, but changed and said, okay, we cannot immediately change to become an indigenous innovation countries. We have also rely on international cooperation. Now, a lot of documents have been published then. And here are some, I will not read all, but you see, for example, CPC, the Central Party Committee, has given guidelines together with the State Council to deepening reform, or here reform plan for centrally financed science and technology programs, implementation of the science and technology system. So a lot of documents were published to give guidelines and publish instruments to achieve these goals. Now, to summarize this part, you can say that since 2012-13, innovation really has become officially the driver of the economic model. With the R&D, with the reform of the science and technology system, the idea is that better research output, improve innovation and economic growth and employment. So this is the idea about that. The final goal is, of course, for China to become a leader, but also economic growth and income improvement is very important. And part of it was the reform of the science and technology institutions, like the Chinese Academy of Sciences, with about 100 sub-institutes in various fields. They have become restructured or started to become restructured. And another part was the innovation climate was improved. And then we have these keywords like mass innovation and entrepreneurship. So the Chinese government, they gave this the idea of maker spaces as places where people can come and in university or research institute and become innovative. And innovation policies like here, improvement of the framework conditions through venture capital, cluster policies, research infrastructure, intermediaries. If you look at China, lots of science parks have been set up, and incubators to improve innovation of small startup companies. And last but not least, strategic industry have been supported, and here you all know maybe the word Made in China 2025, the program which has been not very welcomed in the West because it states that they want overtake the Western countries in the key technologies. They are currently leading it. Now let's look at China and Germany, bilateral science and technology cooperation. In March last year, we had the celebration of 40 years of bilateral science and technology cooperation. And here you see a photo, the picture showing Wang Gang, the former Ministry of Science and Technology. And you see here Chinesische Innovationskonferenz, or bilateral science and technology cooperation. And it's interesting what Wang Gang's story is. He studied in Germany and worked quite a long time at Audi as an engineer. So he knows Germany very well, and the cooperation between Germany and China, thanks to him, also have grown quite fast over time. But now he has stepped down after 10 years, and since last year his vice minister, the former vice minister Wang Zhigang, who was also the party secretary in the ministry, has now become the Minister of Science and Technology. So again, a man from the party is heading a very important ministry. While Wang Gang, he had no affiliation to the Chinese Communist Party, but was member of one of the other parties, which are not important, but it's just unusual. Normally, it's a sort of overlapping of a high position of leading cadres in the party and in the government. Now, I'll give you one example. You already talked about this, Sino-German Innovation Platform. This has been created almost 10 years ago. And the idea is that expert meets from the Chinese and the German side, and discuss how best practice innovation policies and instruments can be exchanged, a dialogue on innovation policy. And I participated first in 2012, and now every second year we have a conference with the Chinese side, inviting lots of people as well, either when we have the conference in Germany or China. So it has an impact on the discussion of bilateral cooperation, at least I hope so. And for this group, we have every year a national conference, which we held in December last year. And the topic was artificial intelligence, one of the main topics, artificial intelligence. And for example, my input was how we should cooperate even in artificial intelligence, although I know it's a very sensible topic, but China, besides the United States, is leading in this field, investing a lot of money, and of course having its own strategy designed in 2017, very ambitious again, that by the year 2049, China wants to lead in this field. But this strategy also very much emphasizes cooperation, international cooperation, and in fact, especially in this field, you need cooperation and you need the dialogue, because artificial intelligence will have a lot of implication for employment, of course, and it has a lot of implication for ethical standards and the issue of privacy. So you need really to cooperate in this field. Another important step was the design of the so-called China strategy of the German Ministry of Research and Education, and I was lucky to participate in that as well. It took quite a long time, about half a year or longer. We had 3 groups discussing different topics. I was heading the group on framework conditions, and the group was consisting of researchers, company representatives, government representatives, and it really was a so-called bottom-up process. And then it got together in a very nice pamphlet you can download in the internet, and the China strategy is the only strategy one ministry has in Germany about China. So now, over the last few years, the research organizations in Germany have started to design their own strategy on China. For example, the Fraunhofer Institute has designed its strategy. Our institute, you see Leibniz, we are the Leibniz Institute, is about to design it. In October last year, we had the first discussion on that topic, and Leibniz Association includes about 80 research institutes in different fields, and part of them came together, exchanged the ideas about doing research with China. And because China divides opinion, as you know, some people say you have to be very careful doing research with China, and others say you have to do research with China because all the great challenges, transnational challenges, climate change, whatever, you have to cooperate. So this China strategy has been a very important step in the cooperation between China, but there are also some challenges, and I think that this afterward would be the main point of discussion with you. We can see that there is a so-called system competition. Because of China's political system being so different, many see that we have an unfair competition with China. China's state is supplying lots of subsidies for companies, enabling them to be buying up, for example, research-intensive companies in Germany, or heading for some new fields without restrictions, because IPR restrictions are not as well implemented as we wish to. So as the acquisition of the R&D incentive company KUKA is for last year, it was last year I guess, this has been a point of discussion about the issue how we should restrict China's acquisition of those companies. But then I think this is your topic, Cora, and I think connected to that, of course, is the idea how the KUKA in China really can implement this high technology, or if we lose something by giving it to China. So what is also a problem is the lack of transparency in many of these regulations when it comes to, for example, research funding or to other areas. If you are not speaking the language, it's quite difficult. For example, there has been a white book on artificial intelligence based on a conference last year, a conference where companies, research institutes, and even foreign invested companies in China like Intel participated. And this conference, the white book is only in China, in Chinese language. But it is very important because it touched all the important and sensible issues like privacy, like responsibility of those supplying part of a machine, like brakes in a car. Who is responsible if we have autonomous driving? Who is responsible if the brake is causing an accident? So all these issues had been discussed, but it's not published in English. I don't know why, but because it's a too long document maybe. But so we really have the problem of transparency. We don't really know where China stands in some respect. And then, of course, incentive system for Chinese researchers is quite different. If we look at the huge increase of publications, this is mainly due to especially when it comes to some journals in Nature, for example, or Science, that researchers get a lot of money for writing an article. We might also get promotion, but the main incentive for Chinese publishing in this kind of articles is to have a lot of money. So, for example, for Nature or Science, you get about 30,000 euros, something like that. So really, it's a strong incentive. And this is quite opposite to the most sort of intrinsic motivation of Western researchers. And I think we really have to see how this will develop, because over the last few years, the Chinese government realized that it's a sort of disturbing incentive system, and they might change it over time, that not only money counts, but also, for example, the acceptance in the research community, which is very important, at least in Germany. But then again, they have introduced these incentive systems from the West, because in the past it was very important that you are political right, in the right way, and now it's important that you are providing referee journal article or third-party funding. Though the same structure we have in the West has been transferred to China and accepted that, but to a much more higher degree, and has created some disturbance, I think. So I think I will close my presentation now and hope that you have a lot of questions. Thank you very much. So are you afraid of China when it comes to research and development? Did you read this article in The Economist, Red Moon Rising? I can just, really, I can think that would do you good, because it starts with saying, okay, we have maybe to be afraid of China, but what China is doing with a lot of money is also providing a basis for us to cooperate with China. So we should be careful, but not really afraid. So you have also to see the positive sides of this expansion of research and development in China.
Maybe if I start the front row questions and then we'll have some other ones. Thank you very much. This is all extremely interesting. You you started out by saying that, well, the big goal for China is to become an innovation-driven economy. This is the transition, that has to be the new growth model. And of course, all this restructuring of the science and technology system is part of getting us there. What I'm wondering about is, and what I would really like to hear your own views. So you work on these commissions, and what is your view? Are they going to reach this? And let me preface this by sort of saying also for the audience that, it's different when we talk about economic transition from low income to middle income and middle income to high income. When we talk about the transition to innovation economy, one thing you said at the very end was about Chinese science output and all these articles that are published with high incentives. And we know that the citation rates to most of these are very low. But we know that overall in science and technology, it's a very unfair game. Only a few people are successful. That's the nature of the game. So venture capital tries to sort them out by mimicking the market. In publications, only a few account for a vast number of citations. So that being the nature of science and technology overall, can they engineer a system that will deliver this result? Is this possible with this sort of party-directed model?
We don't know. To be frank, we don't know. But I have to remember I have to remind you that economists always thought that we need a complementary of institutions like if you are not a democracy, it is very difficult to become a successful market economy. So complementarity was something we thought if China is not introducing it, it will not become successful. But we have to realize that China is successful without introducing democracy. And this is something, of course, frightening to us, that with another sort of political system, they are successful. But also reminding you that there is a Chinese Communist Party, but what is so communist or socialist about China? They have adapted a lot of institutions from the West, a lot of incentives, and they have been able to adapt the whole system. Like they have opened the party for private entrepreneurs. We would call them what would we call them? Maybe a bad word like capitalist, but they call them builders of socialism. So redefining things, integrating successful recipes or models, institutions, and mixing it up with their own system has been successful. So this was in economics in general. But your question is, because of the different system and the repression of freedom of speech and freedom of access to the internet, or freedom in the research area, because we have often the idea that research should not be restricted by government policy. So we should, like the Schumpeterian view, we should just think about new ideas without restriction and implement them. But China's is more that the government says, okay, in 20 years or 10 years, we want to become leader in new materials. And then we find a way to go there, while we often think differently. We also have in China the National Science Foundation, which is promoting sort of free thinking research, but it's different. It's only a small part of it. Mostly it's a so-called mission-oriented innovation. So we have a mission, and the mission is to becoming innovative. But why should China not become innovative? Because in our today's innovation system, what you need is money. And you need the brightest people. And you need a good strategy. They have lots of them. They have lots of people who are bright, who have been trained outside and inside China, and they come back. And they have this 1,000 talent program offering Chinese researchers and the returnees, but also foreigners, very strong material incentive. Not only income, but they have, for example, a high research budget. And they can do not whatever they want, but they can really do things. While if you, for example, are a professor in natural science, your research budget has to be applied by the German research foundation, or maybe you get some money from the government, but the small budget restricts your possibilities, your opportunities to really play in the highest level. But the Chinese have the money and they have the people. But then there is also the idea that once they are researchers and they have to cooperate with international colleagues, then maybe it changes their ideas and their perception, and that changes the system maybe in the end. To an extent, the Chinese government does not want it. But this is also open. We do not know it. We do not know because there is no example in the history of a country with such a political system being successful as an innovation leader. Not catching up is already done, but being a leader in cutting edge technology, this is a word for that. So in, for example, artificial intelligence or in IT, I think they have a good chance. Long answer to a short question,
yeah, well,
sorry.
I mean, what I'm reading in between the lines of what you're saying is that it is again the case of a parallel system. So they have this communist party, but it's not really that communist when you look at many things they do. Here we're sort of, what I'm hearing from you is that you have this state-driven, we have the 2025 industries, we're very focused there, but then there's this other side that is using the available capital, that is using the available human capital, and that's much more free in a sense. You know, there's more of this sort of natural selection, Schumpeterian kind of, and a little bit both processes running in parallel, and that's kind of an experiment as well, because the record on, you know, state-sponsored innovation is not so tremendously good. Before we get to other people's questions, let me just ask a short follow-up. What is your view on IP protection in China? So is it likely that they will become more interested in IP protection as they follow along?
There are good signs for that. In last year at the NPC, the National People's Congress, and of course prepared by the Chinese Communist Party, they have introduced a restructuring of the government. And for example, the Bureau of Intellectual Property Rights Protection has become now a state agency, a commission, I think also. So it has got a different governmental level. It has more power, more resources, and stronger policies. So there are good signs that China really is implementing a better framework for IPR protection. And already today, if you ask foreign companies, it's not or no more the number one problem they're facing in China. The number one problem is qualified employees. Because if they really want to be innovative in China, they need researchers, engineers, and all that. And this is the largest problem for them. Of course, it's still posing problems because China is large, and in some parts of China, still someone is copying or imitating and not observing your property rights. This also happened, but parallel, you have the large cities like Shanghai or other countries, especially areas, especially in the Pearl River Delta region. You have companies who are really pushing ahead, and they do observe intellectual property rights, and they are among those registering for the PCT patents because they want to explore the international market. Yeah, there's a question over there already. Oh, there, sorry. Open, yeah.
When you ask about if I was scared about China, for me it's not, now we are developing some technology which will change the view of the world. For example, with the intelligence artificial. And when you have like a party who is not democratic, you cannot ask we don't ask people what they want to do. And they will develop the technology in their views, they will not. I'm scared about how this kind of technology will be developed by the country who will not take in consideration this population or just made some plan and go in this direction.
So your question is
how could we not be scary when we develop some technology will change the world like intelligence artificial, and it's only made by the party, by the Communist Party, and by his plan on his end, and he don't ask about the population. How do we want to implement it? How do we want to do it? Because I think it's kind of...
I think you referred to the social credit point system, which artificial intelligence makes easy to control the population. I think you talk about that, no?
We're developing the technology, like we'll have a huge part in the future, and we develop it, or they will develop it only by the ideas that they have on it, not by asking what people want to do with it and how they want to do it. For example, when we have like a so important technology like intelligence artificial, how do we want to...
Are we asked by our government in Germany or in Europe?
Yeah, we
are we?
Some meeting, not really, but people can give their
opinion.
Their opinion on it when they have some problem. I think it's more easy for them to express their opinion on the technology than in China. Or
yeah, to some degree, I would see that problem as well. I think when it comes to the consumer, they react very strongly. They either buy the product or not. And they have lots of possibilities to say what they don't like about it. You see the blogs, Chinese blogs, and you need to read it in Chinese. And they all say, for example, they don't like this or don't like this, and the party is very much careful looking at what the trend is. They have their own blogs, also invite people to give their opinion. So I think to some extent they are more observing what is going on in China than the German government does in Germany, or maybe in European countries in general. But I think that there is a danger that a one-party system, not democratic, is using technologies to the adverse of the population. There's a danger of that, and we really have to observe it, what it means, and how this technology then comes to us and is implemented. Yeah, you're right. So I don't know, where shall I start, here or over there? Okay, I start here and then. Okay.
So my question is whether Chinese national macroeconomic, in the macroeconomic level, but I hope due to your research on innovation and technology development in China, you might be able to give us an opinion. And the question is regarding economic development of China. If you see the ladder of economic development, if you see any risk that China might not be able to actually climb the ladder of economic development fast enough, then it's losing some part on the bottom. So right now we have a lot of migrant workers, millions of migrant workers working for companies such as Foxconn, for example. Yeah. And not only due to the trade war, but also increased or fastened by this, a lot of companies actually moving, or some companies are moving to Southeast Asian countries. So not the high-tech companies, but the low and medium-tech companies are moving out of China if it's about producing for the global world, despite for the Chinese market. So the question is there, what is happening with the millions of migrant workers who move from agriculture to a lot of cities in the Pearl River Delta, for example. So that is the lower part of the economic development ladder. So what happens with them when China is moving up? And on the top part of the ladder is the question, can China really climb fast enough? Because foreign governments like Germany on the EU level also currently we have some development where they try to protect the nations against, or the companies against Chinese investment, and also in the US we see this right now. So do you see any risk that...
Sure, lots of risk.
that go back to...
Yeah, lots of risk. I mean, the country has 1.4 billion people. And you have an employment of about 900 million. So this is a challenge for any system. And I think it only is stable because the government is saying that in the future, those who have not participated in this improvement of living standard, in the future, they will be the one who will participate as well. So there is this promise of a good life in the future. And this making China great again 2049 is a promise that in this period, everything will improve, making China great again. So I think you are right that not all of the population will have a better life in the next few years, and they will not achieve everything. But I think compared with other countries of the same size, India, for example, India's GDP per capita, infrastructure improvement, health record, everything is just completely worse. So compared with countries of the same size. So, but then you are right that there's this discussion of China getting old before becoming rich. Yeah, this is the challenge of the demography, and China is responding on that by introducing robotic and having a more innovation-driven economy. But it will take time, and you have this part of China in the northeast or in the central of China which are still suffering from heavy industry restructuring, and this costs a lot of unemployment. So I see a lot of problem, but I also see that the Chinese government has been able over the last 4 decades, because reform period now is 40 years, to manage this risk, and I have high hope that it will become also manageable in the future. But the future you do not know. So there is this high risk, but there is also policy, and there is still the belief, a sort of contract between the population and the government, or the party, you can say, that the life will be better. If they are not able to achieve that, then of course the country will fall apart. If the party will not have high economic rate and growth rate and improve the livelihood of people, then it will fail, of course.
I just read actually from The Economist, they're working currently on some research, it seems like on this case with migrant workers in Foxconn.
Yeah.
And they saw that in the city where Foxconn has a lot of huge company production plants, that the recruitment offices are empty, and now the government put there some advertisement for these migrant workers to work for the military in Xinjiang to calm down what is happening.
Yeah, so Chinese solution.
Yeah, so there's the question, where to put the migrant workers and what kind of industries in the future.
It's all true. I mean, there are the challenges of large countries trying to restructure and to keep up and to improve the innovation system.
Maybe coming back to the incentive system for research. We're working in German academia for a bit more than 11, 12 years by now. I would love to see some of their incentive systems being implemented here as well. Yes, they convert into kind of throw money at people, which people appreciate, but I wonder from this regard, given that this has nothing to do with kind of communist or undemocratic principles, at least not to my understanding of your presentation, I wonder whether Europe or Germany is maybe more afraid of having to change something in the own system, given that we observe that obviously this works very well in China, and these are things that are, from a government perspective, rather easy to implement. Increase the funding of research, make it maybe less self-selective and elite and whatever, to kind of stimulate growth in that. So is this maybe more that we are afraid of the need for change other than afraid of something bad happening?
Good question. I think if you look at the incentive system of research or scholars, you have the intrinsic and the extensive, I think, sort of motivations. And I think there have to be a balance. So if, for example, only money counts, that means that researcher will publish articles and they just cut it into little pieces. Just for one research topic, they write 10 articles. And this is something which is not promoting science. It's just promoting their income level. So this has a distorting effect. And the other, for example, incentive which is distorting is, for example, that they get money, a part of this third-party funding for themselves. And what they do is they look for partners outside their research institutes because they don't want to share that money. doesn't matter what kind of quality the other research institute has, but by this method I can increase my salary. So this is distorting in the end. So there has to be some balance of the two things. And I think basically you're right, and we should give some incentives to researchers, but it should not dominate. Money should not dominate our research, I think.
Fully agree on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess everyone would agree
and there's also another distorting effect, like the number of high-ranking research article of a research institute or a university is defining their ranking in the international comparison. So you see lots of Chinese universities have now increased their ranking. This is why. Publication-driven expansion. So it has this, of course, this has some good effects, but also negative ones.
I see some of the negative sides being fully at work in our system as well, without the money component. Still,
okay.
You see, we have incentives too, not here, but in European systems, but they are about 1/10 of the size. So you might get 3,000 or 4,000 euros, which doesn't really change your life.
Yeah, there's a very interesting article you can read about the topic, is impoverish or publish. So you have to publish to get a good salary, a good income, and if not, you're poor. And they have lots of examples, and they looked at the websites of lots of university and research institutes and analyzing the incentive system of the universities and putting them together. It's very interesting to read. So there's one, yeah?
What is the atmosphere? What is the atmosphere in China about the whole research goal? Is their goal to monopolize the research and development worldwide, or is it more about open research like with CERN or like corporations like Airbus in Europe?
I thought it's a sort of mixed picture because they are in this catching up mode. They want achieve certain goals, but they still depend on cooperation, and international cooperation is the only way to solve really great challenges we have in our society and in our transnational health problems or security issues. You need cooperation, but in some fields, because they want to catch up and they want to be I think it's sort of national pride idea. They want to be a leader. So it's a mixed thing, but I think we don't have to be afraid of it.
And do you think the closer they come to 2049 and once they have caught up in most fields that they will close down on the R&D corporations or will they further open up?
If they want to be successful in foreign markets, they have to cooperate, and close down means just lose. So I don't think that they will follow this way. So we should be more positive about that. And I mean, again, I don't know what the future will bring. Maybe they will change to the worse, but there's a saying by Henry Kissinger, for example. He said, the Chinese have been so emerged in their own restructuring over the last centuries, and I think it will go on for the next 100 years. So we don't have to be afraid of them. So they are so much occupied with themselves, and it's just a huge country, and the region they are dominating as well. So it's not that we have to be afraid. Maybe we have to be careful, of course, not be naive, think about how we can structure research cooperation. For example, write down contracts saying who is giving the IPR rights when there's an invention or something. You have, of course, to be careful.
I mean, you can already see that there is some sort of fear in the air here.
Sure,
so
there is.
I think it's somewhat like a Cold War scenario where there's a technology race instead of total cooperation that you race each other who knows, to the Mars or something.
Yeah, I think basically it's a competition between the US, the leader in science and technology, and China. And the race is that at the moment at least, the Trump government is trying to exclude Chinese researchers from a lot of things, conferences, etc. So there is a restriction. There restrict investment of Chinese companies in US high-tech companies, like Huawei is forbidden to buy any American companies. There is a screening system, very strict. And they have now detected that Chinese companies want to invest in the capital venture market, the startup of American companies. They're very careful protecting this part as well. So it's more the idea of the US that they will lose maybe, and this is why they're so restrictive. But there's another interesting article to read by Dieter Ertz, a very short one, saying if, for example, in the artificial industry, the US is not opening up to the China, then they will lose in the long run. They certainly will lose because the human capital they need for that and the market is in China. So they have to cooperate with China at the end. Not at the moment because of this confrontation between the US and China, but maybe in the medium and long term period. So there's your question now?
This is it. It's looking at the company and the German company. Many sees already the opportunity of invest technologically in China. I mean, if I see Siemens in 2017 moved all the research center in robotics and artificial intelligence in Shanghai. There's 4,500 R&D people working there, and they have 20 R&D hub in China and 11,000 patent applications. So actually, they need to be there where the data are. Artificial intelligence can only work if you get millions of big data and maybe an opportunity.
Yeah, but the question is, do we get the data? Do foreign invested companies get the data? I don't think so. For example, in the health sector, we're providing these X-ray machines, and these data are not transferred to our companies. So we have to be not careful, but we have to just a moment. We have to think how we can participate in this data flows. At the moment, it's too difficult. I think yours question, yeah.
Yeah, my question is a bit provocative. So if a country like China puts a lot of money on the table and invests in innovation and technology, despite all the unfair competition, can the West and developing countries not benefit in many ways from this progress in technology, and can this not, for example, present a first step for a solution to many world problems? I mean, just as an example, China is one of the drivers in making renewable energy sources more efficient than more conservative energy sources.
I'm fully with you.
Yeah.
I'm fully with you. I think we should use these huge opportunities of China becoming so interested in research and development. And, you know, we have just published a report, and maybe when it's published, officially published, I can send it to you, you can read it. We have, in this report, we have described all the mega projects. And they're really huge, and they're inviting foreign researchers and investment. So this is an open space platform. And I mean, do we have the money for all these great research projects? We don't have. So China has the money and the ambition, and we can participate. So I'm fully with you in this argument, yeah. Yeah?
Yeah, thanks for the big picture you presented here. But is it not, so what you presented is that probably Germany needs to fear China now because of this big innovation wave. But is innovation not, let's say it like this, do we not to differentiate between invention, innovation, the different types of innovation, innovation in products, innovation in services, radical innovation, incremental innovation,
Disruptive innovation.
Yeah, and then we talked about research in universities and research or innovation in companies. And if you look at Germany, we are very bad in linking universities with companies and the knowledge transfer over there. America is very good there. America is very good in business model innovation and service innovation.
And the triple helix model. Yeah.
Is it not needed to have a more detailed view on this to have a better prediction of what will be in the future, where we have to collaborate with China, where we have to fear China, where we stand?
Definitely. Right. Our report is almost finished, and we have exactly this question. We look at fields in which China can be a cooperation partner. We look, for example, at specific research institutes. We analyze them. For example, what is the number of foreign experts working there? What is their budget, for example, research budget? What is their outcome? So we have to look into detail. What I try to give today is just an overview. But you are completely right that we have to look in detail, have to analyze it, and because then we know what our challenges really are. At the moment, it is just a bit guessing around. So, but it is also because the indicators, most of the indicators, output indicators, they have a time lag. So when you publish articles, the process is 3 to 4 years sometimes, and even with patents. So it's a time lag, and the development is much faster in many fields, like in business models. So innovation means new products and new services, and business models, like from the IT sector, you know that you have this WhatsApp, not WhatsApp is in America, you have the WeChat, for example. WeChat, the Chinese all know it. WeChat is an application, an app, but it has also a lot of functionalities, much more than we have, like paying system, and you can check your delivery, you can do everything with that. And so these are new models, business models, and this, of course, China is leading in this field. And so we have to see how we can either adapt it or create our own system in that respect. I agree with you in many things. Okay, I don't know what the time restriction is.
Again, maybe if there's no urgent need, maybe we take a little break before we start with the next presentation. But let's thank our first presenter one more time. Thank you very much.